What's shaking, cats and kittens? I'm Rob Lee from Getting to the Truth in This Art. And this podcast is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Bazaar. Bazaar is a gift shop for those seeking the strange and unusual. Got morbid curiosity? Got an interest in natural history? Bazaar's got you covered. Bazaar specializes in antique medical equipment, jewelry, prints, funerary antiques, and many other morbid gifts. The inventory is ever-changing. I'm wearing a great death's head moth pin, and I'm enjoying this hand-poured candle called Overgrown Cemetery. It's great. It has the studio smelling awesome. Head on over to 3534 Chestnut Avenue in Baltimore, it's in that Hamden neighborhood, and see what they got to offer at Bazaar. Tell them Rob Lee sent you. Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today's guest since 2005 has been a reporter for the Baltimore Sun covering crime and police accountability for the last 13 years. His book, We Own This City, A True Story of Crime, Cops, and Corruption was released on February 23rd. From Random House, we have Justin Fenton. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey there. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I am fantastic, and thanks for joining the pod. So big things are popping for you. And I wanted to talk about your work a bit and get into some recent developments. So 1,000-foot view, I like to just say what the person does, but you get into really what you do and what your work is about. Yeah.
So I've been at the Baltimore Sun since 2005, and I've been covering crime and courts and police accountability since 2008. That included covering the death of Freddie Gray and the uprising and the charges against the officers. And then this case, when this gun trace task force corruption case came out, I decided to write a book about it and wrap it all up, just sort of trace the path and the policing strategies of the agency that sort of led us to this point, and also tie in the death of Detective Sean Suter. So that book, it's been a couple years in the making, and it came out at February 23rd, and I'm excited about that. And then just last week, it was announced that it's going to be turned into a HBO miniseries that's going to be produced and written by the same people who did The Wire. Like you said, a lot of things are popping at the moment.
That's good stuff. And congratulations, your first book and all. So I'm glad to hear that big things are going on for you.
Yeah, thank you.
So in this podcast, we like to talk about just kind of giving a real point of view on Baltimore. And I'm glad that you use the terminology earlier of uprising instead of what other people call it outside, riots and so on. What's it like been covering crime in the city that has a reputation for being quote unquote dangerous or a quote unquote bad city?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different layers to our crime coverage. That's why I use the different terms like police accountability, criminal justice. There's so many different ways that we can cover it. We can cover it on a policy level. We can cover it on the neighborhood level. We can cover crimes that occur. We can cover police misconduct, courts. I've tried to cover all of these things in my, time at the Sun, because I wanted to get the different views. One of the things that frustrated me as the police reporter was that I would go to a crime scene and everybody is standing around and saying, we don't know who did it and why did it happen. And it's sad, but there's no answers. And so I actually asked at some point, can I cover the courts? Because I want to cover, when the answers come out, when people take the witness stand, when the detectives have to show their work, because they never talk to us while the case is pending. They file something in court, and that's really all we get. So, and then you started to see questions being more, raised about police work when they get cross-examined and have to, explain themselves, and stuff gets thrown out. And, in my early days of covering the police department, they used to just complain about the courts and the judges, the prosecutors and the judges. I should say that, we arrest people and the courts let them out. And when you get a chance to cover it at the court level, you see why they're getting thrown out. It's bad police work oftentimes. Right. And that doesn't circle back. No one's explaining to them sometimes what they should have done instead. We also try to do good stories, but I often say that's sort of not my department. there's other people at the paper who are supposed to be doing the type of neighborhood stories and features and stories about restaurants and arts. I unfortunately cover the bad news, but when there's good stories on the crime beat, we want to tell them too.
So you touched on, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. You touched on covering the quote unquote bad things. What do you do to kind of like balance that out? Like, are you watching a lot of Disney Channel? What are you doing to kind of balance that out?
Honestly, I'm surprised I haven't been burned out yet on the beat. But I tell people this, and this is the honest truth. It sounds hokey, but like I'm driven each day because I know the stories need to be told. You know, when I wake up and I see something in my email inbox or something on Twitter that's just, I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to tell that story. Like we have to do the best job we can. And that keeps me driven to keep doing it. For a palate cleanser, I mean, yeah, I watch baseball, I watch football, I got back into the NBA during the quarantine. I hadn't watched the NBA in 20 years. Used to be a huge fan growing up. And I like stopped watching it. I don't know why. Maybe it's because we don't have a team here in Baltimore, but I got back into it. So those are some of the things and I definitely I've been going on some walks and things like that, but those are my palate cleansers.
Yeah. Like I do a podcast outside of this and we're covering like weird news and pop culture. It's usually like weird crime. And my buddy just looks at me. He's like, where are you finding these stories? I was like, they're all real. COVID's not stopping these things from happening. And he was like, it's a lot of murder today. And I was like, well, I might have to switch it up a little bit. And it's like, don't worry, I'm going to watch like Supernatural or something that's really just a pure palate cleanser for me. So what was that? What was that reason or that kind of aha moment for you deciding to pursue journalism as a career path?
Yeah. So growing up, my family got two newspapers. I grew up in the suburbs, and they got two newspapers, a morning paper and an evening paper. And I delivered the newspaper. All my friends in my neighborhood delivered the evening paper. I had the rack on the bike, but I really wasn't, thinking that was something I wanted to do. It was just something I was around. And honestly, in high school, trying to put together like college applications, like I didn't have any activities. I wasn't in the SGA. I wasn't on the chess team. I wasn't playing high school sports. And I was like, I got to do something. I gotta get this resume looking better. And so I started writing for the high school paper, and, interviewing people is uncomfortable to me inherently. Like I feel like I'm, somewhat introverted. I stuttered growing up, and it's uncomfortable for me, but it gets me out of my comfort zone because in order to do a good job, you have to be fearless. You have to ask people tough questions. You have to, not take no for an answer. And so, but that's skipping ahead. So I mean, once I got to college, I worked for my school paper, the Diamondback at the University of Maryland, and it just went from there. I went to journalism school. I was going to be a journalist. Not everybody needs to do that. You can study other things and become a journalist, but to me, that was just, if that's what I want to do, that's what I should do. So I've worked at the Sun ever since. Other than an internship in Cincinnati my junior year, I've always worked for the Sun, and I like covering Baltimore. There's a lot of stuff that's important that needs to be covered. It's tough stuff, but it's rewarding when you get to tell the story and you can get to the bottom of something.
Yeah, I think we all are searching for truth, for getting to the bottom of something, and that's what you're doing. So most appreciated. So you touched on a little bit there. That's what happens when you get out the questions early. So share some of those other qualities. You mentioned the fearlessness and kind of getting out of that comfort zone. And I mean, I echo that same sentiment of interviewing people. I've been doing nothing but this podcast and during this pandemic, and it's like, it's a bit much sometimes, especially depending on who the person is, speaking to founders of like major museums and things like that. I was like, this is unnerving. But what are some of the qualities in your opinion that have made you a good journalist, and maybe other ones that you find for like other good journalists that you may not do the same work that they're doing, but you admire those traits? Yeah,
that's a complex question. I think that one of the things that marks my journalism is like being dogged and just staying with stuff. I always wanted people, whatever I was covering, whether it was, the administration at my college or when I was covering the county government and my first beat at the paper, I wanted people to think of me as the go-to, as someone they had to read, someone who was, if there was something happening, I was going to be covering it. And then you hope that you then become that people become a source for you, that people will reach out to you with more story tips and more insight and more, to help improve your coverage. So that was one of the things I got on Twitter in 2009 and just was like, it was such a great extension of my work where I could like tell people everything I was up to. And I could not just write a story at the end of the day or that you would see in the next day's paper, but I could like minute by minute post like what I'm thinking, where I am, like things that didn't work out. Like people don't understand the amount of effort I think that goes into some of this stuff. That's prohibitive, that stops you from doing other stories sometimes, or that takes up your day sometimes. Like, what is he doing over there? How come he didn't write about X? It's like, it's because I was working all day on Y. And or sometimes we write like multiple stories a day. So I always wanted to be like the man, I guess you could say, or the go-to person on my beat. And so, but then like as you do it longer, you start trying to like switch it up. Like I want to write like a long form story that might take a long time, and I got to work on it on the side, or like a series, or I'm thinking of even doing like a podcast at some point. I'm working on a story right now that is like really crazy and complicated. And my thought process about going about it, I think is going to be more interesting maybe at the end of the day than the actual story I come up with or the conclusions I reach. But I've never done a podcast before. But anyway, yeah, I want to like have a diverse like range of like areas I'm covering, going back to what I said before about how like there's always different ways to cover this beat, like, and our work should reflect that. So I don't know if that was exactly what you're looking for, but
no, definitely. Like the main thing I got out of it was just dogged. It's like you want to be that go-to person and let your work like reflect that, and diversifying how you present your work, that coverage and all, because I think that's important when we just get stuck like, oh, you just do this, then it's all I can expect from me. But if it's like I'm getting it out there in this different way or this different fashion, you can look at this coming from me. Just know that this is the stamp of approval, regardless of how you're getting it.
Yeah. And having the people that you cover appreciate it. I mean, we're not writing for the people we cover, but there's something to be said for when people like recognize it, like you understand, and you're communicating it back to the reader in a way that makes sense for both the reader and the people you're covering. Like, it's got to like, and I think that's when you start to develop sources, which are key to doing the job. I mean, if I just wrote stuff off press releases or stuff that comes out, I mean, you really want to break down that, get behind that, get the stories that aren't being told. And a lot of times, who and how, who's talking to you is very, very important to that.
Totally. So we're in this kind of spot where, especially in a very, very low rent, bargain basement sort of way that I'm covering, like I'm regurgitating news stories for that other show that I do. And it's always one of those things of being very niche. And this is how I'm able to at least stay on pace. How has it been like with just the news? Just always, it's always something, getting that story, getting it out there as almost as instantaneous as it appears. Like, how has that been? Because that's something that makes me very curious. Like, the news is always going. So how is it like trying to report something that's always rolling?
It's stressful because the paper has so fewer people than it used to have. When I first started at the Sun, we had 300 people, and we had bureaus in foreign countries and a national staff. And we don't have that now. We've got a small newsroom. I think the latest count was something like 60, 50 people even. Wow. And so and yet as the quote unquote paper of record, we are expected to cover everything. There's a house on fire, there's a car crash, and it's like, it's not possible. So like, I think we're still trying to figure that out. Like we still have this impulse to like, oh, something happened, let's cover it. And then it's like, but is this important? And is this where we make our mark? And so I think we're trying, as we try to get people to subscribe to the paper, and I think you're seeing a lot of sites doing hard walls with their subscriptions and saying, if you want to read this stuff, if you like this stuff, we really need you to subscribe. Yeah. It's important for our long-term viability. But I think that raises the stakes for us to make sure what we're providing is quality content and stuff that is worth paying for. So, like you said, there's stuff going on all the time. We have a breaking news team that tries to respond to that. And then like, there's reporters like me who are juggling like, okay, I want to be the person who's covering this today, but man, there's a bunch of other stuff that I'm interested in too. And it's just a constant like juggling thing.
Totally. So in terms of getting something out there, if there's a story that like you've been working on, you're like, is this done? Is this not done? How is that process? And how do you know when something is like ready to be published with those kind of everything is going out and you wanted to get out there as soon as possible? That's always like being up against a deadline.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to size up each thing. Is this something we absolutely have to have up? For example, like I covered the arguments in front of the federal appeals court this week about the surveillance plane. And it's like, well, that just happened this morning. That needs to go up this morning or this afternoon. Like, it's got to go up. There's other things where you're like, I was the only person there. I went down to Virginia to cover this hearing involving a Baltimore guy who was a victim of the gun trace task force. Mm-hmm. And I was the only one there. There wasn't even Virginia media. I called my editor and said, I really want to sit with this. I really want to think about this. I want to do it right. And I wrote it that night, but it went up the next morning. So, I mean, it's a judgment call on our parts. The editors do give reporters a lot of leeway on that. I mean, I think that, you picture a newsroom maybe from the outside and think that there's these like bosses who are like, the puppeteers who are directing all the coverage and they're telling us what to do. And, it's like, no, actually like the beat reporters are sort of trusted to go out there and go out into the field and come back with things and say, this is what I think of this. And then the editors will weigh in and say, no, I don't, maybe let's try it this way. Or, but I'm sorry, I'm getting a call here. Did I lose you? You're still there?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, it's very reporter driven, I guess was the answer to that question.
Like when I think of a newsroom or anything along those lines with an editor, I think of like antacid and cigarette smoke. That's that whole movie like dynamic or what have you. So we've kind of poked at it a little bit. What is that day in the life of a reporter look like? Like, is it like super early, super long nights? I mean, I'm looking for bags under the eyes. I'm not really seeing them, but also
I got them. I got them.
So how's that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, every day is different. Sure. It's like, it's funny with the book coming out, people are like, can you do, an interview like 2 weeks from now? I'm like, I mean, right now my day is completely open, but it won't be to that week. So let's lock this thing in. Yeah, it can, and I like to go out at night when stuff's going on. I mean, I want to go out I want to have that varied experience. I want to go out to crime scenes. I want to go out when stuff's going on. If there's a city council meeting, I might be covering that. If it's, about police policy. And then there's other days that can be slow and you're trying to catch up on those important projects that you work on. Today, for example, with quarantine and COVID restrictions, I listened to a 4-hour court hearing on my phone in my kitchen, and I was eating and doing things in the middle. And that's such a weird experience, but it sure beats having to get dressed up for court and sitting on a wooden bench for 4 hours. But,
that's true.
So it's, it's like every, and again, that goes back to like being able to pick and choose what I want to do. And like, that hearing I covered today, it stood out to me. I thought it was going to be interesting. It was. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. I tweeted about it, but like, I'm not sure like if it's going to work for an article. I'm still trying to think about that. My editor might want me to. So there's a lot of, it's done on the fly.
I dig it. So this is the point of the pod where we kind of shift, and I'm going to do a little bit differently, but we kind of shift into more of the shameless plug sort of thing or what have you. So I want to talk about the book, obviously, and then we'll kind of get to a last question, then wrap it out. Okay. So how's the response been to your first book? How's that? Because that sounds like exciting. I want to be a writer. How's that sound?
Well, I never planned to write a book. I'm a newspaper guy. I read newspapers. I like writing long form, but it hadn't really ever been something that really occurred to me. And the opportunity was presented. And it took a while to get the book deal. A lot of rewriting the proposal, but, and I feared I was going to blow it. I really thought that I had a great book to write, but I wasn't sure if anyone was going to give me the chance. Sure. And I landed with Random House, which is obviously amazing. I mean, for having feared it wasn't going to work out, being at Random House is wonderful. And they've been very supportive, and I had a lot of freedom in how I wrote it. And yeah, the reaction's been better than I could have hoped. I mean, for a Metro newspaper reporter to have his book reviewed in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and for David Simon and George Pelicanos and Ed Burns to be making a show out of it, I could not hope for more. But I've been really also heartened by. I really wanted to pack in a lot of information. I talked about how this is sort of a culmination of like more than a decade of covering this stuff. Mm-hmm. I wanted people to understand. I wanted to include as much as I could, and I wanted to include a lot of perspectives. I wanted people to get a full view of things. And so I thought I turned in a book that was dense. I thought it was going to be hard to read. I thought it was going to be hard to follow. I showed an early draft to my wife, and she she put it down and I couldn't get through it. And this is an early draft, I should say. But like everyone's calling it like a page turner. They're saying, I've got people telling me I haven't read a book since 12th grade and I read it in 2 nights. And I'm like, really? I mean, I could not have hoped for anything. If I was able to include all the stuff I wanted to include, and I thought it was dense, and people are saying it's readable, I can't ask for anything more. That's great.
So at this point, I have one question. I didn't send it to you because I like to do this. I like to troll people just a little bit. And this is going to be the most controversial thing you're going to answer today.
All right, I'm ready.
This is, I guess, the ball buster question. Who has the best crab cakes in Baltimore?
Who has the best crab cakes? I'm partial to Fadley's, but that's because I like the Fadley's experience. I loved going to the market, and I love that everything about Fadley's. But man, I had a crab cake at what's that place in Linthicum? Is it G&M?
G&M, yeah.
Oh my God. It was the size of a softball. It was remarkable. But I haven't been to Coco's yet, which I feel really bad about. I don't get up that way enough, but Bailey's for me.
Yeah, I had an ex-girlfriend. Her mom they're from St. Louis, and her mom always gets an order of G&M shipped to St. Louis because they won here one time and had them. Like, these are great. I don't care what it costs. Ship them.
Yeah. And do they translate well? Do they ship well?
I think they ship well. There's been no complaints.
Okay.
So
good to know.
Yes. So I want to again thank you for coming on, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to shamelessly plug the book, plug your social media, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. No, again, the book is We Own This City. It's available everywhere, local stores, chains, all Amazon, all that stuff. Support local if you can. It is an ebook. It's in Kindle. Like I said, it's a book about like 15 years of policing strategies that led us to this epic scandal and all the ways that this intersects with things you've heard about in the news over the years. My Twitter handle is at Justin_Fenton. Some guy signed up for Justin Fenton and he never even tweeted in like 10 years, but he's just sitting on that handle. I hate it. But so that's also my handle on like Instagram and stuff like that. I post pictures when I'm out and about. And I just appreciate you for having me on and for all the readers who've supported me over the years. And I hope people like the book.
So there you have it. I want to thank you again for coming on to the podcast. I'll do my sign off and that'll be that. So for Justin Fenton, I'm Rob Lee, saying that there is art and news coverage, really good news coverage, damn it, in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.